Climate change undoubtedly is the most pressing issue for humanity and the planet. Climate crisis could potentially become the ultimate weapon of mass destruction if left unaddressed. From severe floods to heat waves and wildfires, the countries across the world have seen the worst in the past 1 year. Rooted in historical emissions, climate response calls for equitable solutions based on principles of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability. Three threat narratives form the basis of climate security. These include the impacts on military infrastructure, the role of security forces in disaster relief, and climate induced conflicts that demand traditional security, attention, and solutions. Multilateral action under the UNFCCC and the Conference of Parties COPs have seen slow progress, which highlights global governance challenges. There's also political deadlock in the UN Security Council, arising from fears of weaponizing climate change at the expense of development, and that too by a non-representative global body. So perhaps the solution lie even in regional level and country levels and bodies like G20, BRICS, and the International Solar Alliance. So before moving on to the panel discussion, I would like to introduce the flow of the session. We will have 2 rounds of question. I kindly request the panelists to stick 2 minutes. Of course, the Honorable Minister will start with a formal statement, and after which, we will go to the other panelists. And I request the panelists to please stick to the allotted time, and this will allow us for a Q&A segment and closing remarks towards the end. I'm sure we are all looking forward to the thought-provoking and engaging conversations with our esteemed panelists. Without further ado, let us begin the discussions. So Shri Kirti Vardhan Singh, Honorable Minister of Environment and the Minister of State for External Affairs in India, welcome. India is a vulnerable country, and at the same time, it is projected to be a global leader on climate change. I would request you to please share your insights as to the approach taken by India with respect to the topic.
Thank you, and namaskar to everyone. At the outset, you have given me 2 minutes, but I'm afraid I might exceed that time limit, so please bear with me. I have prepared a brief statement on what our country is doing and regarding climate change. So I'll start with that, and I hope that answers most of the questions that one would be having in mind. So at the outset, let me welcome Mr. Joshua Wycliffe, Chief of Operations of International Solar Alliance, Ms. Francois Jacob, United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Republic of Armenia, and Dr. Victoria Panova, Head of the BRICS Expert Council and Vice Rector at the HSE University. So I'm delighted to be here today to address such a distinguished gathering, and I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the government of Armenia and the ORF Foundation for organizing this dialogue. I bring warm greetings from India, a country deeply committed to environment stability and sustainability under the visionary leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji. We all realize that the climate crisis is no longer a distant warning anymore, and it is time to realize that it's a grim existential threat which is already affecting populations worldwide, from floods stretching from the Middle East to China to destructive heat waves across Southern Asia and wildfires ravaging the Western world. The planet is clearly in distress, and we need to do something about it. As a country facing the wrath of natural disasters, we are painfully witnessing that climate change is no longer just an environmental issue, but it has rapidly evolved into a major threat to global security, economic stability, and to the peace and survival of our civilization. Countries of the global south, such as Darfur or Sudan, where water resources have become scarce, and the low-lying islands of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, which are particularly vulnerable to the looming climate crisis, and countries like Kiribati, Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and the Maldives, which face an existential threat as the rising sea levels threaten to submerge their lands. For them, climate change is a matter of life and death. It threatens their very existence as countries and as civilizations. These nations, which are the front line of climate crisis, require urgent international support to ensure they survive. While climate change is really the primary cause of conflict, it can act as a risk multiplier, exacerbating underlying vulnerabilities and compounding existing grievances. The effects of climate change, together with increased competition for natural resources, may, under certain circumstances, have the potential to cause social, economic, or political instability. We stand firm in dealing with these pressing concerns of urgent importance. Under the able leadership of Prime Minister Modi, we are determined to not only take resolute steps on the climate mitigation front, but also work towards climate justice. As much as we are committed to the idea that fighting climate change is a collective global responsibility, we also feel that it must be in tune with the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities. In other words, the developed world should not and must not shy away from its duty of doing more in this endeavor and help the developing nations to keep the commitments towards poverty eradication while at the same time to achieving their nationally determined contributions. In this regard, I'd like to reiterate our government's position on climate matters and issues concerning us. Firstly, we agree that climate change is a pivotal challenge of our times. We concur that the international community that global warming is anthropogenic and centuries of incessant and insatiable quest for industrialization and modernization has landed us in this situation, where unexpected weather patterns, unforeseen changes in glacial ice, rising sea levels, and frequent natural disasters have become the new normal in the world today. As members of the Global South, we share concerns about erosion of developed world's commitments on climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. We stand firm that transformative mitigation policies and technology for adaptation are a necessity, and that the developed world has a responsibility to share technological know-how and resources in dealing with these challenges. Under the leadership of our Prime Minister, India has embarked on a transformative journey towards sustainable development through comprehensive and visionary climate initiatives. India recognizes the urgency of climate crisis and the immense responsibility it bears as a developing country with a large population and complex environmental challenges. Our Prime Minister's Panchamath initiative announced at the COP26 summit at Glasgow embodies India's climate action blueprint. This strategy includes our five-fold commitment towards, number one, reaching net zero emissions by 2070, reducing the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, generating 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030, and increasing the share of non-fossil fuel energy capacity to 50%, and lastly, reducing the carbon intensity by 45% by 2030. Our ambitious goals are complemented by other transformative initiatives, such as the International Solar Alliance, which was co-founded by India and dedicated to expanding the use of solar energy globally. We stand committed to moving away from non-renewable to sustainable, renewable, and clean sources of energy by 2030. Another example of our steadfast commitment to fighting climate change is our Mission Life, which basically means lifestyle for environment and promotes a sustainable way of life rooted in mindful consumption and with environmental responsibility. As our Prime Minister has aptly said, while we may be used to having Plan A and Plan B, there is no Planet B. We only have planet Earth, and so we must remember that we hold this planet merely as trustees for our future generations. This profound statement underscores the reality that climate action is not a choice, but it's an urgent necessity. More importantly, it is a moral responsibility towards our future generations. This is a principle India as a Vish Bandhu follows, and we have to work as one family, one community of nations in dealing with these transnational challenges which transcend national boundaries and affect populations across the globe. I hope that during our deliberations today, we will have open, candid, and frank discussions on whether multilateral institutions such as the UNFCCC and the COP meetings can strengthen their mechanisms to address the cross-cutting impact of climate change. And in our discussions today, we must examine whether our existing multilateral governance architectures are agile enough to effectively grapple with the evolving climate-induced security challenges. Our collective goal should be to ensure that global climate governance mechanisms evolve to not only mitigate climate impacts, but also adapt to them in real life. Green financing, technology transfers, and knowledge sharing must be at the core of our cooperative efforts. We should seize this opportunity to forge strong partnerships that will not only enhance our capacity to mitigate climate change, but also build a more resilient and a sustainable world. With that, I wish you all a very successful, enriching, and productive dialogue ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Singh, and also for highlighting the importance of means of implementation, where we do see a lot of erosion from the global north. Also, thank you for highlighting the importance of adaptation, which is indeed very important when it comes to climate security. I would now like to turn to our next speaker, Mr. Dimitri Mariasin, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So, sir, so your first question is, how is UNECE addressing climate-linked security risks in fragile and conflicted areas in Europe and the neighborhood?
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure for me to be here as part of this distinguished panel. I think before addressing your direct question, we need to agree on what we mean by climate security, because one can talk about politics of climate, one can talk about climate and security as an agenda for discussion, or one can talk about actually climate security, rather climate insecurity, which is prevailing globally and making lives of millions of people around the world miserable. Let me start maybe with the last bit. 40% of the world's population are considered highly vulnerable to climate change. This is the latest IPCC data, and we're not talking about a marginal problem here. We're talking about a global risk of the magnitude that we have not faced. 8% of GDP is one of the estimates, is the cost associated with addressing the climate agenda in developing countries alone. And then we know that these figures translate into human lives and tragedies. Let me bring it to the region that you asked me about, though the difficulty for me, of course, is that UNECE covers 56 countries from Canada to Tajikistan. So when I pick examples, I can be quite creative. But let me start with giving you the example of Central Asia, the neighborhood for this region. Over the past 50 years, Central Asia lost 1/3 of its glaciers. And it's not just about glaciers, it's about ecosystems, livelihoods, and a way of living for millions of people. According to some estimates, there are some 2 to 3 million climate migrants already in Central Asia. So we are talking about a set of insecurities that then translate into what many call a propensity for extremism in the region, what many call the crisis of illegal migration in some parts of the world. But we do need to remember that underlying conditions are poverty, inequality, and deprivation, and very often they are driven by climate change. So now, if we talk about climate security, we can talk about what climate change actually does to the economies and the societies. And here we need to bring such examples as the drought in 2023 and I bring another example from our region, in France, that has led to a country actually temporarily halting its nuclear reactors. We bring the examples of transport corridors A lot of talk about the Trans-Caspian corridors, various routes, alternative supply routes to Europe in the context of the war in Ukraine. And yet, nobody is actually considering, well, we do at UNICE through our International Transport Observatory, what is going to be the impact of climate change on the routes of corridors being developed now. So we need to now be looking at the future of energy mix. Nuclear or not is a choice you cannot just make on economic or ideological grounds. Transport corridors going by one country or another is not just your choice you can make geopolitically or purely on economic grounds. You would need to consider, and we do this through a GIS-based application where you put a layer of climate risks, be it drought or flooding, you need to consider climate risks. But this is not all. And I leave you with the thought that, and I'm happy to continue in the second part of the panel, that you need to actually evaluate also the choices we need to make in our economies and our societies to address the impact of climate change. And here, and I will speak about this, water is the key question. Water scarcity is going to be potentially a make it or break it for humanity, and it is directly linked to both the effects of climate change and also what choices we will make to respond to it, especially for climate change mitigation. And another one is critical minerals. The world faces a literal dilemma. If we have if we need to quadruple green energy production, including e-mobility, does it mean we need to potentially triple the mining of critical minerals in some of the most vulnerable and poorest countries of the world? So I'll leave you with this thought, and in the second part, I'll be happy to give you some examples of our work that addresses these issues, including for regional cooperation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mariasin. And thank you for sharing UNEC's effort of integrating climate risks in infrastructure and transport corridor planning. We will now go to Mr. Joshua Wycliffe, who is the Chief of Operations Officer at the International Solar Alliance in India. ISA, as you all know, is an international intergovernmental body. So Joshua, your question is, India has been advocating, and ISA also has been supporting the idea of one world, one sun, and one grid. So and in the morning discussions also, we saw how connectivity is one of the key pillars of regional cooperation. So what is ISA doing in terms of the regional infrastructure around solar energy?
Thank you, moderator. And I also want to thank the government of Armenia and ORF for having us here for today's event. We're grateful for giving us an opportunity to come here and share our experiences. The One World, One Sun, One Grid, shortened by the name OSHAWOG, was the vision that was set by one of the co-founders, that's the government of India and the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Basically, the sun never sets, as we all know. Some part of the earth has a sunrise and a sunset as well. So that was a basic principle of how we could utilize and maximize the sunshine. And that, of course, with the addendum of having the opportunity to be able to store electricity from solar means was the way forward. So countries are coming in, but with a world filled with geopolitical issues and other factors that govern, it of course has been taking its own time. But the successful thing that's come out of it is the modeling that goes from OSHAWOG is to be able to cross-border trade. And I'm going to go a bit further into it. If you have to trade power or solar energy across the border, you must have security, energy security yourself. You must have sufficient for yourself and your populations to that extent that you're able to sell or trade what is surplus within your borders. So to be able to do that, if we can realistically ask ourselves how many countries today can have its own and fulfill its own requirements before exporting, we are still learning. The curve is growing as we learn every day, day in and day out. So I was also going to go into further the political stability of a country to be able to achieve energy security within its borders has several factors. I'm just going to talk about one, which is basically the lesser the socio-economic grievances, the lesser the inequality, the lesser the poverty and marginalization, the quicker you become energy secure within your borders. I was going to give an example. I was posted as Secretary of State for Environment for one of the small island states from my government. And one of those things I noticed was these are small island development states where, with the sea level rise, as the Honorable Minister was mentioning, some of those islands lose inches by the year. The coastal erosion happens so bad that on a night when there is a huge king tide, waters rush into your bedrooms, washing off cattle, properties, and lives as well. And this is a phenomenon during every cyclone season. So this leads to not just protests among the community, but an unease among the community and poses a great challenge for the government of the day. And all these form the part of the vision of Honorable Prime Minister of India when ISA was born, to be able to bring forth a model that could make sure countries, small island states, least developed countries, could become self-sufficient and energy secure. And of course, then we speak about Oshawott and being able to order. So there have been very good, efficient modeling within which you could provide nature-based solutions on the coastal zones, which today cost only 1/10 the cost of building a sea wall and securing your coastlines across several communities. So ISA is able to provide solar support, solar energy through mini-grid, energizing communities at 1/4 the cost of what your hydro could cost today across some of these communities. I will be able to give examples or exemplars in my second round, but some of those countries have had political unrest inside, and these solutions today are providing transformative steps towards stability among communities within some of these island states. I was also going to talk about African nations. 8 out of the 10 countries that have had conflicts in Africa have belong to the LDCs, the least developed countries. And all the reasons that is if you're not secure within your borders, then obviously you're opening the pathway towards conflicts, not just within yourself, but without as well. So about a year ago, I was accompanying my team. One of the missions in the team was to be able to build capacity within the country to be able to take care of their own renewable energy means in terms of maintenance of equipments and being able to provide energy and not be dependent across borders for their maintenance of their solar equipment. So as we drove past those roads for our meetings with the minister, we saw every 200 meters we had checkposts. Every other block was bullet-ridden, marking a testament of how much unrest had affected energy security within the borders. So that nation started from ground zero that day in being able to build capacity. Today, it can boast of 60% capacity to fulfill its own solar means. And it's in the forefront of states that have faced conflict, but today are on the pathway of recovery. So it's in these areas of conflict, in these areas of difficulty and challenging times, that the International Solar Alliance is able to provide that kind of intervention so that the nation becomes energy secure within its borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua, for talking about how important energy security is and the work ISA is doing to ensure energy security, including in conflict areas. So I'd like to move on to the next speaker, Dr. Fabrice Vardhan, who's an associate professor and research director at the University of Lyon 2 in France. So you work a lot on Middle East region. So how do you foresee climate change and climate-induced migration intensifying political instability in an already volatile Middle East region?
Yeah, thank you for your invitation and this question. Yeah, climate change become a very new important parameter in geopolitics. And this morning we spoke about the crossroad for peace. And we haven't speak about the climate change and the conflict who could damage this project. It's something that Armenia should take in consideration with the example of Middle East, for instance, because Middle East is a major crossroad in the world with the Red Sea, but also with the Silk Road and the new corridor, India, Saudi Arabia, Mediterranean Sea, and one corridor from the Gulf to Turkey through Iraq, who is under building. But how to be a crossroad in stable environment, and stable environment provided by climate change, because Middle East is facing major security challenge from its vulnerability to climate change and violent conflict. It's the world's most water-stressed countries. Water is rationing in many countries like Iraq, Syria, Jordan. And this is creating, of course, migration, not international migration too much for the moment, internal migration, but this internal migration are damaging the stability of the countries. Many countries are vulnerable because of their weak adaptive capacity to climate change. It's the case, of course, of Syria, Yemen, because they are still in civil war, and you have no more governance, no more state able to help the population to rebuild their home, their economy, or if people rebuild, it's without any consideration for climate change. I was last year in Raqqa, in Syria, a very famous city because it was under the control of Daesh. People rebuild the houses, and you need IC in summer, you need cooling in winter. They are sacrifice the environment just because they need to survive. And so today, Syria, it's an end way for any crossroad in the area because of this local instability, because this about the huge number of IDPs who are in the country, more than 6 million, and this is not sustainable at all for everybody who would like to invest in the country for make a road. There is a lot of speculation about the Chinese road for Syria, but it's not possible at all in such situation. Another case, very interesting, it's the case of Iraq. Iraq is a wealthy country, but unfortunately the governance is weak, and there is no vision, there is for the future, there is no adaptation to climate change. I visited the city of Basra this year, South Iraq, where Iraq and Turkey and Gulf countries want to create this huge corridor from the Gulf to Turkey and Europe. It's not anymore Mesopotamia. It's not anymore agricultural land. It's just salty and dry land. If you visit this area of Iraq, it's a disaster. You will be very surprised by the disaster. So the most of the rural population is moving to the city of Basra. Now Basra is probably 5 million of people. And few years ago, you have huge demonstration because you have salty water, you have no electricity. What does it mean in summer where it's up to 50 degrees during months? It's impossible to live in Basra without IC and without electricity. So the governor of the city finds a solution. He's providing now electricity 24 hours to the population for free. For free. What does it mean? People have IC, even in sustainable settlement. They don't invest in good housing able to prevent the houses to be hot. It's just unsustainable, very costly and unsustainable. And what will happen if you have an electric shutdown during summer because people use too much electricity? You will have just 5-6 million of people who will take the car and try to move north to Kurdistan area, to Kurdish mountain, because you have fresh air. I don't think that the local population in the Kurdish mountain will welcome this population from the south, and we will have this internal migration, forced migration, will provoke a conflict. It's clear, and you can forget the dream of Iraqi corridor. So the conclusion, it's how country who could adapt to climate change, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, because they have means, they have money, they have good governance, could build a future in an unstable environment with neighbors who are just in fire. It's just impossible. And if we think a little bit about the conflict today in Red Sea between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, you have a part of climate change in the Yemeni situation, in the Yemeni civil war. And it's not just by an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia through China that you will solve the problem. And the poor Yemeni people will still strike Saudi Arabia or the vessel in Red Sea just because they want Saudi pay for help them to fight the climate change, to adapt to the climate change, to have a better life. It's kind of a blackmail from the poor to the rich country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balanke. And thank you so much for highlighting the fact that based on your work, you've seen that internal unrest can actually weaken adaptive capacity and include fragility of states. And thank you so much for your remarks about the Middle Eastern region. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Victoria Panova. She is the head of BRICS Expert Council, as well as the vice rector of HSC University and the Women 20 Russian Sherpa. So, Victoria, BRICS countries face diverse climate challenges. What are the key security risks that BRICS members need to prioritize for addressing climate-driven instability?
Thank you, Chair. And allow me to start with thanking the organizers for inviting and holding such a wonderful event. ORF India always makes great endeavors and great forums, as well as Armenian friends. It's good to be on this hospitable land and have very different, very diverse discussions and learn something new. So, as we had already heard from all the other speakers, some of them concentrating more on the global agenda, but with some regional aspects as well. Yes, of course, we are in a still difficult situation despite numerous efforts that are taken, probably not always with too much sincerity, by governments, by international organizations, and let's say not enough and too late. And that is why, according to the United Nations, I will get some bread from Dmitry, last year was the hottest year on record, with global average temperatures soaring of approximately 1.45 centigrade above average, the pre-industrial levels. And this year, WMO confirmed that for the next 4 years, we will have like 80% of probability temperature exceeding this 1.5 degrees centigrade in the world. And also last year, their emissions hit the new high. Of course, we understand, and the statistics show that the growth rate of those emissions, it has slowed down, but at the same time, it continues to have an upward trajectory. BRICS, definitely BRICS are very diverse, so it would not be really possible to say, okay, this is like a single grouping with a single set of problems, including in climate change. And thus BRICS encompass the world in this regard, and the problems also and risks associated with climate change as well. Yes, the BRICS countries account for quite a lot of emissions at the moment, and unfortunately, we are not different from the rest in terms of the trajectories. It also continues to grow, and but there is some progress. And we as Expert Council, together with the BTTC, with their help, we are doing their monitoring, which we agreed back in 2020, of our own performance. And what we found out, that probably the country that could be commended most out of all of us currently is the South Africa, that has been significantly reducing its carbon footprint lately. All of us are vulnerable to climate security risks. And as I said, we are in all our diversity, also seeing the different problems ahead of us. If you look at like index as a whole, without picking the problems, then out of us, Ethiopia, India, and Egypt would be most vulnerable to their incoming climate risks. And we heard His Excellency, Honorable Minister, talking about what's being done, which is also quite impressive. But, for example, if we look at the Gulf countries or North Africa and the countries of BRICS from there, they are mostly exposed to severe water stress, and Dmitry has pointed this out as well. If we look at China and India, of course, there are other problems that arise, but they are vulnerable to air pollution, and this is one of the key issues. If we look at Russia, one of the main problems would be melting of the permafrost, which is significantly, as a result, influencing the whole ecosystem. So, but at the same time, with those issues being different and those risks being different, we still need, and we are trying to have the approach that would ensure the climate security for each of our countries, but also for the rest of the world. And one of the ideas that was coming, and of course, with BRICS countries being emitters, but also being contributors to the global good. Look at Brazil or Russia, or and other BRICS countries with big amounts of forests and sweet water sources. This is contributing to their general good, and I think more needs to be done in terms of policy in each of the country to sustain it as a way forward. If you look at other issues, by now emissions are counted by production. And we've been discussing it within the G20, and I know you will be, there will be a question later on, but also within the BRICS, that we need to be approaching the problem of dealing with climate change also from the point of view of who are the consumers. This is important. So consumption base, not only production base. So this needs to have a different approach to the problem, and we have here a very knowledgeable person from Russia heading the laboratory of climate economics, who's been working on this for several years, and I hope finally will come up with their solution and come to with this idea that would be accepted around the world. Another set of issues is that when we talk about climate change, it's often, and it is one of the associated with their energy transition and energy resources. And what is happening in BRICS countries is that a lot of those are relying on carbon fossil fuels. We look at South Africa, we look at India, even China, a lot of coal is still used. And while lots of efforts are taken in order to transit
Victoria, requesting you to just
to
wrap up.
cleaner energy sources. We understand that this transition should be taken, and this is important, this is one of the key approaches. This transition should be taken in response and taken into account their development models and their needs, because there cannot be in climate change one-fits-all approach. And this is probably one of the common principles that BRICS is also sharing, but I will talk more about it on the second round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you so much for highlighting even issues like permafrost, which, in fact, are quite important in this discourse. I just want to, I think, considering that, we are severely running out of time, and that most of the speakers really overshot the time by almost double, I think we can take a round of questions, and I'll add my own questions to the audience question and pose to each one of you. And, you can add that with your closing remarks. So, maybe we can take 3 questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. My name is Achal Malhotra. I'm former Indian ambassador to Armenia and Georgia. First of all, thank you very much to all the distinguished panelists for their insights and educating us on a very important issue. My Honorable Minister has dwelt at length many aspects of this issue. Fortunately, there is an international consensus that climate change is no more a myth, it's a reality. We also have a consensus that it's a collective responsibility. And also, there is a sort of acceptance of India's position that the developing world, it's a common but differentiated responsibility, and the developing world must come forward. So my question is, are we happy with the climate finance pledges that have been made by the developed world so far? Are they living up to the expectation? Because this is a global problem. Unless the largest number of countries in this world, which belong to the global south, are not able to undertake the required measures, all other efforts will be useless. So, from any of the panelists, are you happy with the level of assistance that so far has been provided? If not, what can be done to force or motivate the developed world? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your question. The second question there.
Hello, I'm Ornella Tucci from Albania, and I used to represent almost 44 countries in the GCF Green Climate Fund board. So my question is, what about adaptation? Mr. Mariasin talked about mitigation and the importance of the mitigation, but what about adaptation? And in the meantime, what about the funds? So the environmental issues has a slogan, the polluter pays. And what about the countries that they are the biggest polluters? And I'm talking about the non-Annex 1 countries. Thank you.
My name is José Ignacio Pradas. I'm EU high-level advisor to the government of Armenia. I'm based here. What about technology transfer? I mean, we are speaking about mitigation, but the funds, we need a new, in my opinion, is a new financial international architecture, how to make possible technology transfers, and particularly to use the talent of less developed countries.
Sure. Madalitso Piri is my name. I'm a research fellow in South Africa. My question is just around considering that we're not talking about the transnational impacts or transnational injustices that have actually formed climate crisis. What are the potential realities of thinking about climate change as an issue of climate reparations as opposed to these elusive realizations? And I think that has to pay attention to the particular effect. Specifically, I'm thinking of the issues that Dimitriot had raised around China and the shift that has actually taken place, that the Western countries continue to rely on China as a factory of the world, right? And then to recuse the region, the West, from the responsibilities of thinking about the transnational issues or transnational injustices that have shaped the global system in the current. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we will take these questions now. So, Honorable Minister, you can take this question. Now we're happy about the pledges from the Global North. And Dimitri, to you, what about adaptation? Joshua, to you, what about technology transfer? Is ISA facilitating technology transfer? And also, like, considering that many of the countries of ISA are also very, very, they don't have the technology, they do need technology transfer. Victoria, you could elaborate a little bit on the idea of climate justice. And Fabrice, maybe you could talk about, we're talking about climate security. You think it's more of an issue that is interstate or intrastate? So we'll just go in this order, but I'll just request the panelists to be brief. So, Minister Singh, over to you.
So the question is regarding...
Are we happy?
Are we happy with the... Well, if you really want me to put it in black and white, the voice of the Global South, we are not. We started with the initial figures of 100 billion, but the latest IPCC report has clearly stated that it'll require around $4 to $5 trillion for the developing nations to keep up with their mitigation and adaptation strategy. Well, we all know the figures that are already there and what we have expected and what we have got as nations. And I really need not contemplate on it further. We need to continue to negotiate at the forthcoming COP meetings, especially in regarding the principles of CBDR, where we talk about the common but differentiated responsibilities in accordance with our respected capabilities. So the developing nations, in my view, definitely need that finance and technological support so that they can meet up with their targets. And I think that is a hard reality. I would also like to address a few other issues that have been raised by the panelists regarding security, climate security. I would like to point out that our country is majorly an agricultural country where more than 50% of our population are engaged in agriculture. And agriculture, as you know, is very heavily dependent on water and the climate conditions. We are already undergoing a very harmful climate change, which is affecting our agricultural produce. But as far as the water is concerned, and before me, it was raised in the panel, that the water is going to be a critical component for climate security. Most of our rivers have their sources in the Himalayas and are outside the national boundary. It is just a scenario that can happen that if those sources are interfered with, it is going to affect lakhs of our population downstream who depend on the water for the produce. Similarly, our monsoons, which come from over the oceans, they supply us rain and water which recharges our groundwater. The ocean is an international territory, and if a country, at the pretext of, let's say, carrying out experiments or studies, seeds those clouds before they reach our shores, and those clouds drop the water in international waters. Is there an international mechanism or rules to address these kinds of questions that can come up in the future? I don't think there are, and they need to be addressed. A panelist talked about the Siberian and how the permafrost is melting there. That melting of that permafrost is going to release billions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That is caused by global warming, that is caused by burning of forests in other parts of the world, and increasing of these greenhouse gases. Now, who exactly is responsible for what, and how can those responsibilities be, first of all, allocated and addressed in terms of adaptation and mitigation strategies? And while this question continues, we also need to look inwards and look at our own consumption patterns, which is mission life as propagated by our Prime Minister, and try to live as sustainable a life as possible so that we can, at an individual basis, contribute towards fighting climate change.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Minister Singh, for also highlighting the aspect of individual lifestyles. So over to Dimitri. So what about adaptation and how is this being addressed by UNECA?
Thank you. Before I go to adaptation, though, I want to pick up on the comment about transnational reparations. I think before we talk about reparations, we need to talk about more transnational cooperation. There are mechanisms, there are solutions, there are legal frameworks that actually allow, for example, countries sharing basins, lakes or rivers to cooperate, including on the most acute climate-related issues. And UNECE, of course, hosts the Water Convention, which is now global, covering countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, and of course many in Europe. And we have seen how countries cooperating on these issues within the Water Convention can achieve results. I'll give you an example from outside of our region, where in 2020, Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina used the principles of the convention to establish a regime of operations for the Itaipu hydroelectric dam. That has already led to more cooperation, to practical results through so-called water windows. Agreeing on water use helps address intermittent shortages and water stress. This is one of the very specific ways in which, through the Water Convention and related basin organization instruments, we can address climate change adaptation. So can we do more, including in this region? Of course, we know that Armenia is not yet a party to the Water Convention, but we are very reassured by the recent steps taken between Armenia and Georgia, for example, to start working on the monitoring of some of the shared rivers. This is a very welcome step, and we can do more. On adaptation further, on energy, I mentioned before the resilience of infrastructure. So we have launched a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, as part of which a community of practice on resilient infrastructure for energy transition. We need to be seriously considering the effects on climate change on production. And if the Honorable Minister permits me, the example I have in my talking points is actually from India. The devastating glacial lake outburst flood in Teesta Valley resulted in the loss of 1,200 megawatts of generation capacity within 1 hour. What country on earth is ready for this? What kind of investments and what kind of investment strategies do we need to foresee such eventualities, prepare, build scenarios, and then build in agility in the way the water, energy, and food security nexus is managed? Because ultimately what we're talking about here is how do we manage the water, food, energy nexus to prevent the worst of the climate disasters affecting millions more people than they are already affecting today.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Over to you, Joshua. What would you like to add on technology transfer?
Sure, thank you. One of those things that is very crucial for cross-border capacity building is being able to establish technologies elsewhere, technology that has been successful in one country, being able to transfer it to elsewhere. If you looked at India, when India started its renewable journey, and today, if you look at the cost of energy per kilowatt, it's gone down by 4 times, making it so attractive. It's all because of 2 things. One is the policy, the role that policy played on India, and then how this could be transferred to other countries. A lot of countries still today struggle with the lack of policy to be able to attract international investment. The lady in white asked about financing and funding. So crucial is when you have the technology and when you're able to show a tangible model on the ground with a successful technology and a successful policy that wraps itself around the technology, the sky's the limit. You're able to showcase that, sell that to multilateral banks and even organizations like the GCFs and the GEF and all these organizations, because they all want to see something that has a touch and feel before they open their wallets. So it's very important that you are able to, and I give you a lot of these exemplars that we have at the International Solar Alliances. The most recent one is, I was aware of a small island state where there was racial disharmony within one community, one community set up a public rental housing, social housing. ISA stepped in. I was able to, and one of the key issues there was the lack of electricity, consistent electricity. So we were able to come in with a mini grid solution to be able to provide non-stop power supply to that family and reducing the cost of power by half or less than half. So one of those things was the technology that worked in universal access within the Indian small community villages was directly uplifted. And with modifications, slight modifications that were done, we were able to put it in place for the small community of 72 households in one block. Today, the moment we hadn't even completed, we were in talks with the government to be able to look at their policy tweak with the Energy Act. And one of those things was, interestingly, their supplier, which was a state-owned entity, was also the regulator. So you couldn't have your supplier and the regulator doing the same thing. So there was a monopoly there, blocking international investments. Some of these issues through policy changes, review of Energy Act, simply changed and we had a lot more investment. One investor came in with $378 million into one project within 6 weeks of changes being announced, number one. Number two, the UNDP suggested they offered 9 communities which they could energize. So finances started pouring in just at the transfer of technology and the policy that could wrap around so that it gave a strength in terms of perceived risks that investors and multilateral banks had towards projects. One last thing that ISA does is we also have a blended finance mechanism that thwarts the perceived risks that are associated with investments and financing. Like for instance, if you look at Africa, I mean last year, $300 billion were invested into the solar energy. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe me, less than 4% of that went into the African bloc. Yet, Africa has the least energized in the entire world, and Africa has the most population in the world where they suffer from the lack of electricity. So where it's required the most was the least because of the perceived risk that investors had today. So this blended mechanism, which we've now started off with DRC, the Republic of Congo, has been a good exemplar. I'm finishing. So exemplars like these provide not just technology transfer, the financing and the policy.
So thank you. So you basically are saying that we need a package, also to enable technology transfer. So over to Fabrice, what do you think? Climate-induced instability, national issue, transnational issue? Please, your comments.
Yes, of course. Of course, the first thing is to reinforce the international cooperation because it's at this scale that we have to take measure. But be realistic. The solution also comes from at the national level, and it's something very important because population cannot adapt alone. They need public support from the state. And so I think that fragile country, for instance, I explained it with Iraq. If you don't have public services, if you don't have electricity 24 hours, if you don't have water in the network, what's happened? Wealthy people move to gated communities, private city, where you have the full services, and you have an adaptation to the climate change. But the rest of the city stay in poor condition, and the situation will be worse. Because if you have the wealthy people who move in a private city, they will have less interest for the normal city, and we will see a cleavage inside the society. And of course, this cleavage will create violence, insecurity, and civil war. So, what we need, I think, is to reinforce the governance at the national level, because it's at this level that we can have a good adaptation and not just private adaptation or short-time adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Also, thank you for being brief, and thank you for highlighting the fragmentation that can happen within a society. So, Victoria, over to you. Actually, your question which I posed was addressed. So maybe, can you just talk about multilateral reforms, which is needed? Of course, you've also been very active with the G20. G20 is seen to be as a more nimble organizational structure, wherein, of course, in the UNFCCC COPs, things move really slowly, and process has actually triumphed the purpose. So, your final thoughts on multilateral reforms?
Okay, thanks so much. First of all, neither BRICS nor G20 organizations. They're not trying or pretending to take this governance role. So this is rather a supporting role to their other international multilateral organizations that should be doing their job. Adding the question of is financing enough? Of course not enough. From what I remember, they promised finance, it wasn't there. So not even what is needed, but what was promised was not allocated. And definitely, if you look at BRICS countries, for example, we are doing quite a lot in terms of technology development, technology transfer. But obviously, if we look at advanced economies, they have a number of solutions. And in case of, for example, climate, or be it health, or other issues of the global relevance, this is common good. So this should be shared, which is not happening. But what is BRICS doing? So far, look at their economy strategy for BRICS economic partnership. It's ending next year, and next year we'll have a third edition already with their expanded BRICS. So it already deals with the issues of climate change by means of development of technologies, and we have a number of mechanisms within BRICS, like Partner, or like this working group on climate that was launched back in 2015. Together with the ministerial, that are dealing in part with those issues. Another one is mobilization of funding for green transition. And as I said, this is not enough just to have funding from the BRICS. We need advanced economies to join in. But so far, what BRICS, as you remember, we've launched the NDB, New Development Bank, that is filling maybe not a huge, but still a gap. And some of it is going towards infrastructure funding, which is also needed for climate adaptation. Another one in the partnership strategy is introduction of the principles of the closed loop economy, which is also quite important in order to attend those risks. And of course, risk management of climate change related hazards. And this is done within BRICS. With the G20, some of it is done, but as you know, with the geopolitics, sometimes overwhelming, we have G20 sometimes forgetting that they have to attend issues of the global advance. So that's why we need to remember G20 is about economics, is about managing global risks without politicization. So in order to attend to the needs of the poorest and of those most affected. So, but those two mechanisms, be it G20 and BRICS, I still believe more in BRICS, but we cannot do much without the other countries. We cannot do much without advanced economies. So this is a joint endeavor. And I believe they should be, with all the enlisted mechanisms and projects suggested by the colleagues, have to push further international organizations and states in order to achieve our aims. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. And of course, thanks for highlighting the G20, and BRICS can only play a supportive role. As we head towards COP29, there'll be a lot of expectations on the new collective goal on quantified finance and CQG. Of course, hopefully, we will see that countries learn from the experience of the previously set goals. But yes, as we come to an end to this discussion, we do see that climate security lies deeply in the intersection of traditional and non-traditional security, particularly energy security, infrastructure. So these are like the key issues that came forward from these discussions. Of course, there remains the issue of river countries that share river boundaries, the upper riparian states and the lower riparian states. And let's see, whether these are best solved bilaterally or through a multilateral body. So yes, important questions, but I think this is a topic which needs further discussions, and we will continue to deliberate on this further beyond this forum. So thanks to all the panelists, and over to the organizers. Thank you.